The internet is a huge part of our lives, but putting it into our fiction can be difficult. Many writers leave it out of their stories entirely. Others try to incorporate it into their fiction with awkward results. How should our fiction handle the internet? Should our fiction try to handle the internet at all? Here to talk about this is linguist and cartoonist R.E. Parrish.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Now, you suggested this topic. What is it that made you want to talk about it?
Yeah, more so than I do comics, but I don't write published written fiction or anything. So I'm more just a fan, like a reader. And I've always been intrigued by how people try to incorporate the internet or even specifically social media into novels, especially those from the last like 10 years or so, and how rare it is that I personally think it totally succeeds. And I find it fascinating the ways that it can be good and the ways that it doesn't work so much. So yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it that you say that it can succeed, but so often it doesn't.
Mhm.
It is odd, right? Because if you read older novels, if you read any 19th century literature, you're going to find there are tons of long sections where people write letters to each other. Dracula is diary entries
Mhm.
and letters. There are big sections of Pride and Prejudice where it's Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy writing back and forth to each other. Tons and tons of 19th century literature involves these long flowery letters. Huge portions of these novels are letters, and there's, I mean, a lot of novels and stories are written entirely as letters in the epistolary format, and it works great. It works beautifully. But we don't see as much of that in contemporary fiction with the internet, right? There's
Mhm.
been very little internet epistolary. So I'm trying to figure out what is it about the internet that lends itself so poorly to the novel as compared to long form letter writing.
Right, I know. I remember like back when I was in like middle school or something, it was sort of the mid 2000s, and there are this sort of wave of books that were written in AIM speak, like
Right.
so for mostly for kids or teenagers, so not terribly serious, just sort of documenting the ups and downs of these teenage protagonists' lives and their interactions with each other. And even though, I mean, those felt a little bit forced, a little bit hello fellow kids kind of,
Right.
even at the time. So yeah, and it's really not as common, you're right, as the old fashioned actual letter epistolatory novel. And it's hard to say, like, do you think people are scared of that, or do you think they just don't think it's a good idea? So you're a writer, so what have you thought about stuff like this, I
I
guess my
mean,
question.
in my case, I think it's the issue of time. I'm Trends move fast. Social media, internet trends move fast. You know, slang, the platforms that are popular, the way people communicate, the expressions they use, it all moves super fast, and publishing moves so slowly, right?
Hmm.
Like between the time when you decide I'm going to start a novel versus when your novel comes out is going to be years for the most
Right.
part. And by then, it's going to be wildly different slang. I mean, if you'd started a novel in the early 2010s, what platform were people going to be on? What social you might have a lot of young people on Facebook, and
Hmm.
like now, it's for your racist uncle.
Exactly.
It's for your weird anti-vaxxer aunt. It's not for young people anymore. Or like, oh my god, what memes were people using 5 years ago? What were people using reaction gifs back then? Or I mean, now it's like, oh god, that means you're older now. It's not a
Hmm.
cool young person anymore. So if I'd like started a novel trying to involve trying to write about the internet and incorporate the internet and social media in it in the way that it's incorporated into our real lives, which is such a big part of our lives and a big part of why how we communicate, it would be hilariously outdated by now. Or I guess I'd have to like use a fake name. Like you wouldn't call it Facebook, you'd call it something else. But then it's usually pretty obvious. Like, all right, this is just a stand-in for Facebook. This thing you're
Exactly.
describing. This is like especially because right now, like, what are young people on? I guess young people are on TikTok or something now. There's not really a way that you could, oh, just change the name. But the way you interact on Facebook is wildly different than the way you interact and engage with other people on fucking TikTok. It's such a
Hmm.
crazy different experience. It's a different way of engaging. So this thing that was very up to date and very modern is now like, okay, grandma, log off.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's even worse if you see writing that tries to sort of incorporate either memes or like certain turns of phrase that are popular. Like that stuff comes and goes so quickly. It's so easy to date yourself with including stuff like that in fiction.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd have to come up with fake memes and fake slang or something, but
Right.
that's really hard to do effectively.
Mhm.
It still
Exactly.
sounds very "Hello, fellow kids."
Exactly. Yeah, I became interested in this topic. I'm gonna read from just a really quick excerpt from a an article from Prospect magazine, which was written by Imogen West Knights about what is called the internet novel, which came out last year when there was this sort of crop of fiction that was about social media, and so there was this sort of topic online in fiction circles, I guess, for like a week. But there's a book called Fake Accounts that is quoted in this article that I did read by Lauren Euler that addresses the point of writing about the internet, which and the quote is, why would I want to make my book like Twitter? If I wanted a book that resembled Twitter, I wouldn't write a book. I would just spend even more time on Twitter. And so this article says it's probably true that we don't want to read books exactly like Twitter. Social media offers the highly simplified form of storytelling and initially more addictive pleasure than the slower, deeper ones of literature. The point is not to enact a sort of warped Turing test in which the writer tries to mimic a computer as closely as possible, but the style doesn't render things exactly like a Twitter feed, and it does, in my view, get to something true about the way the internet has affected our minds. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, not just the pace. That's a good idea of time, and because it's not just the pace at which social media changes, but it's the pace at which we read on social media versus
Hmm.
like you've got to think that when it's posting, it's these little things you're firing off a little bit at a time very, very quickly. You don't really take a lot of time to think about a post and craft a post. And if you look at your feed on whatever social media platform, it's very much an endless now. It's these little
Yes.
ephemeral things that are meant to be like eaten and then forgotten. It's like eating potato chips. You just eat a potato
Yeah.
chip and you never think about that potato chip again. Whereas letters, at least old fashioned writing letters, people would really like sit down and carefully compose these. And when you're sending them, especially in like ye olden times, you're thinking it's going to be a while before this
Right.
thing reaches the destination. So the relationship between like Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy writing each other letters, feel as temporally is a lot closer to the relationship between writer and reader of a novel
Yeah.
than to Twitter user and Twitter follower.
Yeah, I can think of a recent book that sort of tried to get around this by having the two it's Sally Rooney's most recent book, Beautiful World, Where Are You, where she had the sort of two main characters email each other in this they deliberately chosen to write each other like letter like emails instead
Hmm.
of conversing on social media so that well, I'm just guessing here, possibly because it is either easier or more fun or more appealing to write than something like writing Instagram DMs between friends or something. But it is much more like something like Dracula or another sort of old-fashioned epistolatory novel than something that incorporates, I don't know, characters DMing each other, like I said.
Right. And
Mhm.
there's also the reality that a lot of the communication online isn't just text. You know, you're sending emojis, you're sending if you're in your 30s or older,
Mhm.
you're sending animated gifs or reaction images, and maybe you're sending links to things, video clips, blah blah blah, which like
Mhm.
a book, you don't you're not
Yeah.
going to do that.
No.
You can't physically do these things in a book.
If you tried to, I think it would be, at least for me, it would be a little tiresome, you know? It's like,
Yeah, just when you see an emoji in a book, it's just like, "No, no." Even if you use
Exactly.
emojis in real life, when you see them in a book, just, no, I don't like this."
Exactly.
And I'm also thinking of the style. Communication in DM is a lot more glib
Mhm.
a lot of the time. It's very glib and short and quick and a lot less eloquent and flowery.
Mhm.
And it's fine because in a short post that sort of glib and breezy style works, but
Right.
if like 200 pages of that.
Yeah, it's gonna get like, all the characters are gonna talk in a very samey way if you wanna make it anything approaching realistic, because no one's bothering to craft their own voice in an Instagram DM, or at least I don't when
Right,
I'm talking to my
there's
friends.
yeah, now that you mention it, there's an internety way of communicating too
Mhm.
that's also particular to each social platform. There's a very Twitter irony type of way, there's a
Right.
very Facebook uncle type of way to talk. Back in the live journal days, there was a very live journal-y type of way of talking. There's a something awful type of way of talking, and
Mhm.
everybody ends up sort of writing that way.
Right.
Even if you have your own very unique writing style, you sort of end up writing things that way. And again, it works on a message board or something, but 200 fucking pages of all these people who end up using the same cadence is
Mhm.
it sounds like a nightmare to read this shit.
Right, exactly. No, I wouldn't. I'd tap out.
Yeah.
I don't think I could take it. Yeah, so I guess the other aspect of internet fiction then, and one of the reasons why I thought of this topic in the first place was actually reading your short story, The Empath,
Oh,
when that was published. And not that that like is like about the internet, but it seems sort of influenced by ideas from the internet or social media, to me at least. So I guess the other sort of side of that coin being people trying to portray the way of thinking that comes from being online in fiction, as opposed to literally portray being like, there's a new dystopian app. Could it be bad or whatever?
right. The Black
So
Mirror way.
exactly.
What if your mom were an app? What then?
Exactly. But yeah, so I tend to think that is more compelling in the form of a novel or a short story than What If Your Mom Were an App,
I,
personally.
it definitely, I think, kind of ages better.
Hmm.
Like if
Absolutely.
I imagine if I, because the empath absolutely was about a kind of rhetorical style or social
Hmm.
dynamic that is very prominent online, but the story does not take place online. It takes place in the forest with no computers or cell phones
Right.
in there.
And
And I
that's
mean,
why I think it works, like, to
thanks.
me at least. Like, I think it really works that way. Taking
Yeah,
that idea and putting it in a different context works
yeah.
a
Like
lot better.
if it had just been on a message on a social media site, it would just be like, okay, whatever. Here, just log off. Just log the fuck off. Who cares?
Yeah,
And it wouldn't age
exactly.
very well. People in the forest, that ages quite well. There will still be people in forests in 100 years, probably. No, there's probably not going to be a Twitter in 100 years, thank God.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna do the horrible thing I always do now, and I joke that every time I'm on a podcast, I'm gonna talk about David Foster Wallace, except
That's
for the
okay.
time I was on a David Foster Wallace podcast when I really wanted to talk about Dune. Um, it can never win. But there's this there's this essay that he wrote in the early 90s that probably a lot of people are familiar with, or if they're or have heard of. It's about sort of television and fiction, called E Unibus Pluram, and he's talking about sort of postmodernism, irony, and the current state of American fiction. And his sort of focus was television, as opposed to the internet, which I think is probably more of a concern for people of our generation. But
Right. I mean, this is 80s and 90s. It was all
exactly.
TV. I mean, Don DeLillo wrote
Hmm.
White Noise, all about TV killing your brain and things.
Exactly, yeah. So he's sort of describing here, and I'm gonna quote from this as well, because if I try to paraphrase it, I'm gonna mess it up. But he's talking about image fiction and this sort of particular response to television that was sort of then popular or prominent in American literature. So the essay says. The particular fictional subgenre I have in mind has been called by some editors postmodernism and by some critics hyperrealism. Most of the younger readers and writers that I know call it the fiction of image. Image fiction is basically a further involution of the relations between lit and pop that blossomed with the 60s postmodernists. The new fiction of image uses the transient received myths of popular culture as a world in which to imagine fictions about real, albeit pop mediated, public characters. Early use of imagist tactics can be seen in the DeLillo of Great Jones Street, the Coover of The Public Burning, and in Max Apple, whose 70 short stories, The Oranging of America, projected an interior life onto the figure of Howard Johnson. It's in the last couple of years, though, that the image fiction scene has really taken off. A.M. Holmes's 1990 The Safety of Objects features a stormy love affair between a boy and a Barbie doll. Volman's 1989 The Rainbow Stories has Sony's as characters in Heideggerian parables. Mark Lehner's 1990 campus smash My Cousin, My Gastroenterologist, less a novel than what the book jacket copy describes as a fiction analog of the best drug you ever took, features everything from meditations on the color of carefree panty shields wrappers to Big Squirrel, the TV kiddie show host, and Kung Fu Mercenary, to NFL instant replays as an X-ray vision, which shows leaping skeletons in a bluish void surrounded by 75,000 roaring skulls. One thing I have to insist you realize about this new subgenre is that it's distinguished not by a certain neo-postmodern technique, but by a genuine socio-artistic agenda. The fiction of image is not just a use or mention of televisual culture, but actually a response to it. An effort to impose some sort of accountability on the state of affairs in which more Americans get their news from television than from newspapers, and in which more Americans every evening watch Wheel of Fortune than all three network news programs combined. And please see that image fiction, far from being a trendy avant garde novelty, is almost atavistic. It is a natural adaptation of the hoary techniques of literary realism to a 90s world whose defining boundaries have been deformed by electric signal. For realistic fiction's big job used to be to afford easements across borders to help readers leap over walls of self and locale and show us unseen or dreamed of people and cultures and ways to be. Realism made the strange familiar. Today, when we can eat Tex Mex with chopsticks and while listening to reggae and watching a Soviet satellite newscast of the Berlin Wall's fall, this is very 90s,
Yes.
um, i.e., when darn near everything presents itself as familiar, it's not a surprise that some of today's most ambitious realistic fiction is going about trying to make the familiar strange. In doing so, demanding fictional access behind lenses and screens and headlines, and reimagining what human life might truly be like over there across the chasms of illusion, mediation, demographics, marketing, image, and appearance. Image fiction is paradoxically trying to restore what's mistaken for real to three whole dimensions, to construct a univocally round world out of disparate streams of flat sight. And he sort of goes on to say why he thinks it does not succeed at.
Oh,
Uh,
dis.
yeah, no. He talks about He says it's not the rescue from a passive, addictive TV psychology that it tries so hard to be,
Right.
because most Imagist writers render their material with the same tone of irony and self consciousness that their ancestors, the literary insurgents of beat and postmodernism, used so effectively to rebel against their own world and context. And the reason why this irreverent postmodern approach fails to help the Imagist transfigure TV is simply that TV has beaten the images to the punch. The fact is that for at least 10 years now, television has been ingeniously absorbing, homogenizing, and representing the very cynical postmodern aesthetic that was once the best alternative to the appeal of low, over easy, mass marketed narrative. And how TV has done this is blackly fascinating to see. So, anyway, sorry, that was a very long passage, but I
That's
think
okay.
I think that sort of gets at the problems then of trying to incorporate television into fiction, and I think it's fascinating to sort of compare that to the problems with trying to do that with the internet, because I think there's similarities and there's differences.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just especially the idea of this thing absorbing
Hmm.
the Borg-like, almost the weapon that were trying to use to fight it.
Right,
The
exactly.
internet is extremely good at that.
Hmm. No, 100%. And I think the difference between TV and the internet is that TV is something sort of unidirectional, like it's
Yeah,
coming at you, whereas the internet is obviously you're part of it, and you're influencing it in maybe a very small way, but in a definite way.
right, right.
So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. How would you get across that, like, multi-directional, just buried in too much information from too much chatter and too many sources
Yeah,
in a book, which
it's
is a
hard to
much tinier
say.
thing?
I think the best example I can think of from recent years is the book Ducks Newburyport,
Mm,
which was like it came out I want to say 2019, and I want to shout out my friend James Webster, who wrote an excellent article about why it's like the definitive internet novel, which I agree with,
mm,
because it's again it's not really about something like Facebook, but it is a completely stream of consciousness, like thousand page doorstop from the point of view of this sort of middle aged American woman who, when you read this, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way, but her mind has been melted by stuff like Facebook, and you see the sort of fracturing of her thoughts because of how the internet has and the sort of constant deluge of news that you get from being online has
right.
shaped the way she thinks about things and reacts to things. And I think it's fascinating. I think it is really well done, and I think that's one of the best ways you can do fiction about the internet.
Yeah, yeah. Let's think of some other. Well, let's take a look at some other writers and other people who've
Hmm.
done some really good novels or short stories about the internet. I've got to plug June Martin's flash fiction piece in Blood Knife. It was
Hmm.
Blood Knife's first published work of fiction. I sexually identify as the I sexually identify as an attack helicopter controversy.
Oh yes, I
And
remember when that came out. That was really good. I like that one a lot.
it was brilliant. And I love, I love the opening. Log off can't be done. Some people are online, but I am online. I am online. With that emphasis, when you realize what she means by that, you're like,
Hmm.
fuck.
I love it.
It's fantastic.
It
And
really is. Yeah.
it gets across the absolutely bizarre social dynamic of a weird online Twitter feeding frenzy, and how it can like take over your life, even though at the same time, like, it is just online.
Hmm.
That is part of, I think, part of why a lot of writers maybe don't put it online, or don't include the internet into our fiction as much, partly because we're fucking embarrassed a little bit, because like I spend too much time on Twitter, and you start realizing how mad you get,
Oh yeah.
how angry you let this stupid thing make you, when it's like I really should just go outside.
Literally touch grass, yeah.
really should just touch some fucking grass. And there is still a lingering idea, which I think reasonably, maybe less so, especially with younger people who've been isolating for 2 fucking years, that the
Mhm.
internet isn't real and it's not important. Like, what's that? What do you mean you're being cyberbullied? Just log off. Go outside. Like, there is that sense of embarrassment, I think, that we're including this thing, that even though it's obviously important to us and obviously such a big part of our lives, there's a part of us that acknowledges, like, it really shouldn't be.
No, that's completely true. Yeah, I when we're sort of looking at compiling a list of good examples, I also have to shout out the ongoing comic, which I really, really like from Max Graves called What Happens Next, which
Mm.
is part of the digital anthology that you sent me.
Yeah, the very online digital anthology, which is extremely good. It's on Itch.
Yeah.
It's like a pay whatever you want, and it's just a collection of fiction, poetry, comics, whatever, about being extremely online, and it's
Mhm.
really, really good in that it gets to it actually gets the dynamic. And looking at very online, I think the thing about it that is good is that there is the sense of embarrassment in oneself and the willingness to make oneself look ugly, which I something I'm thinking about just as we're
Mhm.
talking about this. Writers are supposed to present a certain way on social media, and it's this very writerly way, and it's like, I'm so great, hashtag I am writing, I'm
Oh
amazing,
no.
I'm so wise, and anyone who dunks on me is a terrible peasant, and I'm wonderful. And I think that need to present yourself, that kind of prevents you from writing good internet-based fiction, and that you can't admit to yourself that you are absolutely just as bad a fucking worm in the dirt as anybody else.
Oh yeah.
And
I think
very online is very good at admitting, like, nope, we're all worms.
yeah. No, I if I think about how social media, I don't know, shapes my perceptions and causes me to act, it is not good. I remember both times I've lived outside of America for substantial amounts of time and had my sort of my relationship with America be largely mediated through the internet because I'm not there, you know?
Right.
I found myself really, really just 100% hating it, just being so embarrassed. And to be clear, like there's lots of reasons to hate it and be embarrassed by it. I'm not saying there's not,
Right.
but it was like I only saw the bad and I only saw what was horrible and embarrassing, and it was because I was looking at my Twitter feed and looking at whatever news came up regarding stuff happening in America and not living in where I used to live and interacting with actual people,
Right.
which would perhaps temper my judgment of the entire nation, which I just found it becoming very harsh. Well, and I guess it also social media makes me sort of quicker to judge or put people into categories
Oh,
or
yeah.
stuff like that, and you have to sort of step back and take a breath sometimes because you are really just seeing the I don't know, in a lot of places online you're seeing people really vent ugly parts of themselves, and it can be hard to look at for too long.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, I really do think that a big part of good or effective internet fiction is you have to acknowledge that this is the bad part of you
Mhm.
that is probably showing, or this is the id, or this is a part of you that's kind of shamelessly performing in a very particular way to get likes and engagement, and
Mhm.
to win imaginary internet points,
Oh yeah.
and that you're becoming like meaner in order to get those imaginary internet points. And it's when you actually have to think about that about yourself, you get a little embarrassed, as
Right.
one should. And I
Yeah.
do think that a heck of a whole lot of writers don't want to do that. I would not trust a writer like, say, Sarah Dessen to have the kind of self-awareness to be willing to do that in a meaningful way.
Right, 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 right. Oh god, I remember that. You said that
Right?
name and I was like, "Where do I know that from?" It's like, "Oh yeah." All that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I guess there's like and I wanna plug this because it won a bunch of awards, so it's not like, it's relying on me for sales or anything, but I want more people to read the graphic novel Sabrina by Nick Dernasso. I want to say that's how you say his name, and I apologize if I get that wrong,
I
but
have no idea.
it is a really excellent, really quite dark graphic novel about a woman named Sabrina who goes missing. And sort of the main character is this military guy, and Sabrina's boyfriend comes to stay with him, and he's friends with Sabrina's boyfriend. And then you sort of see the story of what has happened and what continues to happen unfold from there, about what happened to Sabrina, and then what the internet and a radio program that's a bit Alex Jones-ish makes of it, and what that does to the people that Sabrina was close to, and how it affects them mentally, and how they sort of get, in the eyes of people who don't know them, completely dehumanized and really put through the ringer for essentially no reason. And it's really fascinating. I'm being intentionally vague because I don't want to give too much of it away, which I feel I've already done a little too much. But I just want to talk about how that really does go into the dark parts of the dehumanization of just being a figure on the internet to people, and what it allows people to do to you. And
Right.
it's just really excellent and haunting.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, has there been a really good piece of fiction that's similar in format to the whole these weird situations where not just a murder victim, but also maybe a living person becomes an obsession of the internet? I'm thinking
Mm.
specifically of the horrifying story of Chris Chan, who's
Oh
a
my
person who's
god.
just been, like, kind of stalked or followed
Yeah.
by this crowd of anonymous people for, what, at least 10 years? There is more information on Chris Chan's life than there is about fucking Abraham Lincoln.
Oh yeah, I remember the Christian thing starting. I must have been in either middle or high school, and it's still going, which is insane. And I can't imagine what that would do to someone's psyche, like to be in the center of that. I think
Or what drives a person in their psyche to do that? To be, "I
right, like
am gonna
to
spend my
stalk.
life
Yeah.
obsessing over this person. Isn't this person weird?
Hmm.
Isn't this person that I spend at least 12 hours a day thinking about, who I've never met and never will met, isn't this person weird? And not
Right.
me. I'm definitely not weird in this."
Yeah, it's sort of the darker, uglier side of the stan culture thing, which is also a really interesting phenomenon.
Oh god.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, speaking of stan culture, I mean, I whenever you're online and anywhere engaged relatively in fandom space, I just think about Annie Wilkes so much and how
Yes.
she's like the internet before it existed.
Yeah, that's
Stephen
so
King
right.
somehow managed to find the internet before it was the internet, and it is Annie fucking Wilkes.
That's so true. I saw you actually, and we're getting very online here. I saw you either retweeted or liked something about someone saying you don't deserve to have OCs if you treat them badly, and other people should have,
Yes.
which is
Fuck.
honestly, that was incredibly funny to read, but also you wonder, it's like you hope that was a joke. You hope that was a joke
I
post.
don't know.
It's
I
hard
don't
it's
know.
hard to say.
God.
Yeah. Literally that, yeah.
You
It just
dirty bird.
oh god.
Oh.
Yeah, it and sort of the online backlash that you get as a writer, it must be just constantly misery times 1,000 from random anonymous internet people.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's weirdly random. I feel like the people who get that backlash, it's not totally random because it's women, like 9
Mhm.
times out of 10, but also the thing that brings it on is often totally innocuous and you would never expect, like, really, this is the thing that everyone got mad at? I've
Right.
said way more controversial shit, and I just said I don't like strawberry ice cream, and, like, people are calling me a murderer now? The fuck
Right.
just happened?
Yeah, you had the whole deal with the fan fiction
Oh my
thing a while
god.
back. I'm so sorry
I've
that that
seen so
happened.
many sci-fi writers say very similar things to what I said and get no pushback, and I can't help but notice that they're largely men.
Yeah.
Can't help but notice that, and also men who have a little bit more power in the industry. So,
Well, it's and to quote someone who has been a guest on this podcast and whose writing I enjoy very much, Gretchen Felker Martin. She wrote an essay that I think was actually in the very or online digital anthology about like, and she sort of analyzed why it is that it's nearly always women that get that sort of
yup,
intense attack, and it's almost certainly because of the attacker's sort of subconscious, or possibly not subconscious, possibly just conscious misogyny, and the
right.
sort of desire to put down a woman in whatever context where you can still convince yourself that you're the good guy.
Oh, right, right.
Hmm.
I'm actually protecting myself. I'm protecting marginalized people, and by marginalized people, I mean me specifically.
Right. Yeah.
Oh
Oof.
gosh.
But
But we're
yeah,
getting off topic. Back
we
to
are.
fiction with internet, and I really strongly recommend the very online digital anthology. It's really really good. We will include a link to it in the episode show notes because it's highly recommended.
Hmm.
Support independent fiction, support interesting stuff like this. It's super good. It's super cool. So let's see some other fiction that deals with the internet for better or for worse. You put Ducks Newburyport. I remember Oryx and Crake did have it at least in parts, but I kind of felt like it didn't work as well just because I read that book pretty recently, like a couple of years ago, and it's very clearly about the early 2000s internet, but
Mm.
it's supposed to take place in the future. The way they're engaging with the internet, I don't think there's even really social media yet.
Right.
It's just websites, and it's like, oh. I mean, granted, it's Margaret Atwood. It's a super old lady writing about what the internet's going to look like in the future. She's not going to fucking know.
Right.
You can't
Yeah.
expect it, but it just made the whole thing feel weirdly dated.
Yeah, that makes sense. I haven't read that one, but it's always hard whenever you see sort of, and I guess this is a sci-fi thing more often when people try to predict what
Right.
the internet's going to be. It's more miss than hit,
Right.
obviously,
I
both in terms of being accurate and in terms of being good.
Yeah, I kind of miss the weird early 90s like computers are wizards
Yes.
versions of what the internet will be, and it's always this extremely graphic, I guess, virtual reality interface, the Matrix type thing, and it's kind of great. I kind of miss those because yes, they were wildly inaccurate, but at least they were fanciful and kind of fun.
Yeah. Oh, I remember you put on the sort of list here, talking about fiction that uses the internet as a format, which is, I think, another really fascinating type of fiction as
Right.
well.
Yeah, I know Super Sad True Love Story by Gary Steingart, I believe, uses the internet as a format using
Mhm.
mostly text and DMs. I haven't read that book though, so I can't really talk about it.
Yeah, I haven't either. So,
I should have. I did not do my homework. It won a bunch of awards, which
oh
either
yeah,
means it's either very good or very bad.
yeah. No, I definitely I see you wrote down Ted the Caver here. I loved that's an iconic piece of internet fiction to like internet based fiction to me.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like internet-based fiction is definitely like a different animal, like
Yeah, and that's like a
using
very like web 1.0. It's such a good like part of why that's so good to me is it's like a snapshot of the way the internet used to be in addition to being the like spooky story that it is.
Right, right. Well, we had a creepy pasta episode, and we were talking about how much of traditional horror and gothic is about lost media. Where it was the
Mhm.
Castle of Otranto, I think, said, this novel was rewritten from an original manuscript found on an old scroll discovered in an ancient castle and stuff. Like so much of it is this came from a centuries old book. This was copied from a clay tablet, and
Mhm.
the fact that it is old school, like GeoCities internet works in its favor because it's kind of like if the only way you could read Castle of Otranto is if it was on a decaying old papyrus,
Right,
you know?
exactly. Yeah,
It's
no,
so
completely.
fucking good.
No, it's awesome. Yeah, I love stuff like that. A lot of like creepypasta, as the name implies, gets copied and pasted out of its original format. But with Ted the Caver, you have to go to the original webpage, and it's so much better for it.
And it's the experience of you keep hitting next, 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 next,
Yes,
and then the
and then
page
it
just
doesn't.
starts refreshing.
Ah, yeah, it's so good.
And it
Yeah.
dawns on you like, "Oh, no.
Mhm.
That's it."
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I never know how to say this. Is it 17,776?
I
I don't.
don't know. I
Yeah,
don't
I've only ever
know.
written it, but that's a great one,
It's
obviously.
brilliant. It really uses the internet as a platform for fiction in just a fantastic way of incorporating Google Maps and videos and audio and scrolling text, and it incorporates so much into this amazing extent. I don't know if I've ever seen someone use the internet so effectively in such a varied way on
Mhm.
web-based fiction. It's not just let me put some words on a page, but it's like I know it's super corny to say it's a multimedia experience, but it is, and it
Yeah.
works.
Oh,
And it doesn't
100%.
feel cutesy or gimmicky. It's all incorporated in together really, really effectively.
Yeah. I'm thinking now of, and this isn't an internet-based thing, but it's also not written fiction. It's a movie which I haven't shut up about since I saw it because it's quite, I don't know, it's gotten into my head. It's called We're All Going to the World's Fair, which technically came out last year, but is now sort of more widely available, and it is about creepypasta.
I've
Um,
heard very good things about it.
yeah, it is you think it's sort of going to, or at least I did. Maybe I'm stupid, but I thought it was going to be a creepypasta movie. And it is about creepypasta, but it is more about online communities and the types of people who create and sort of sustain these stuff like creepypastas, online sort of creepy myths, and how does that sort of sustain itself? Stuff like Slender Man, people do have to make the videos, the writing, the whatever, and so it's
Mhm.
about the people who create and like curate the stuff that goes into these online myths, and it is about this relationship between a teenager who's started making these YouTube video, these very spooky YouTube videos. I'm doing the World's Fair challenge, which is like the creepy pasta thing for this movie, which was sort of created for the movie, and about this sort of middle-aged guy who is encouraging her to continue posting this stuff. And what is so fascinating and really got under my skin and was scary about this movie to me was less so the myth of the World's Fair or whatever, and more the very odd relationship, the very odd, hard to pin down relationship between these two characters. Like what exactly does this guy want? Is he trying to, is he sort of like a writer in a way? Is he trying to curate this online community because he likes the story and he wants to create a story? Does he, there's sort of hints that he might think it's actually real. He might for some reason think this online myth is real and he's a paranormal investigator kind of a thing. Or is he like a pedophile? And it is
Right.
very unclear. And so it's a fascinating movie about like online spaces like that and online creators. And so I super recommend it.
That sounds so good, and I
Yeah.
hope it comes into a theater in my area because I wanna see it in the theater, even though I'm sure
Yes.
watching it at home by yourself on a laptop is probably even more effective.
Yeah, I think there's pros to either format, but super recommend it either way.
Yeah. Let's see, other fiction that incorporates the internet or is sort of about the internet or deals with the internet. We wrote Sabrina, we talked about let's see, uh, do we wanna discuss Black Mirror, or is there anything we can add to the discussion about Black Mirror that hasn't already been said?
Yeah, I have only seen like the first couple of seasons of Black Mirror, and it was more miss than hit for me. I guess there were a couple episodes I liked, but they were, I don't know, they were the ones that were less so. What if your mom was an app? Um, like I,
Right.
I remember liking the first one about the prime minister and the pig. It was very grotesque,
Right.
and technically it involved the internet, but it was less what Black Mirror has been come come to be known for, I guess.
Right. I mean, I guess the idea of trying to explore the horror of, and weirdness of social media by making it, what if it was physically real? Like, how
Mhm.
after your loved one dies and their social media profiles are still out there and you cling to it, but it's this fake
Mhm.
version of who they were. Well, what if you could get like a physical dude who was based on that? It's like,
Right.
well, you can't. Like, it's not the same thing.
Mhm.
There's a way to, well, what if this thing was what if you could block people for real in real life and they couldn't
Oh,
see you?
yeah.
Like, okay, but you can't.
Yeah.
You can't, it's not, that would be very horrible, but it's not real. And I mean,
Mhm.
I guess it is. It's called a restraining order, but, you know,
Right.
like, it just, kinda comes across as old man panicking about something that's not really that much of a problem, or having trouble articulating, like, "Yeah, these things really are kind of fucked up and frustrating
Mhm.
bad dynamics, but you just kind of made them look a little ridiculous now."
Yeah. No, I think there is other fiction about social media that goes so much better into the dark side of it than I don't I don't fault them. I don't fault anyone for trying to do stuff like that
Right.
with science fiction or whatever they
Right,
choose
of
to.
course.
Yeah, but I think stuff like the comic What Happens Next or stuff like Sabrina goes so much more into what's dark about it. And maybe that's a personal preference just because in both cases I think they focus a lot on the interactions between the characters, like
Yeah.
the interpersonal dynamics and how they're affected by various fucked up internet cultures things in whatever either removed or very direct way.
Yeah, and probably I'm guessing that a lot of the stuff here too, like, I think I respect a lot of Charlie Brooker's writing, and Screen Wipe and stuff like that is really good, but a lot of Black Mirror kind of feels like it comes from a very well-to-do, the perspective of someone who's
Mm.
well-to-do and pretty well protected, and the worst thing that social media is gonna do to them is they'll get canceled, quote, unquote, but not really.
Hmm.
Like, maybe their one stand-up comedy special will be canceled one time, but they'll bounce back,
Right.
and that'll be it, and that's the worst thing that can happen. And so you get a well-connected guy with a cushy media job who's very unlikely to actually lose that job. Maybe he'll have to film an apology video or
Exactly.
something, going like, the internet. It's like, well, you're gonna be inconvenienced, you're gonna be okay, versus someone who is actually at really legitimate feeling unsafe, someone who's a lot more vulnerable in a much
Hmm.
more real, tenuous way. Like, from what I can tell, the family in Sabrina, who becomes,
Hmm.
I mean, if Alex Jones decides to make a conspiracy theory off of you, then you're fucked.
Yeah,
Like those poor
exactly.
Sandy Hook parents. Jesus Christ, those poor people.
Yeah, the crime in Sabrina is not what happened at Sandy Hook, but the reaction to it is very similar, and it is obviously just very sort of horrifying to witness the impact on the people who are already deeply impacted by the disappearance of this woman. So,
Right,
yeah.
like, you can't even grieve because now you gotta
Mhm.
deal with this other shit too. Like,
Mhm.
I keep thinking about how one of the parents, the Sandy Hook victims, had to rebury their kid in an
Mhm.
unmarked grave because
Right.
InfoWars fans kept trying to dig it up to prove that it
Yeah.
wasn't a real body. They're like, "Jesus fucking Christ, man."
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't get much worse than that,
That's
honestly.
just, grieving your kid in a mass shooting is bad enough without fucking, you can't even do the normal grief ritual things that usually are supposed to help a little bit.
Mhm.
Fuck, man.
Yeah.
Ugh, but sorry, I got too grim. Other other internet related novels. You mentioned in the outline in 2021 the novel's Fake Accounts and No One Is Talking About This were released.
Yeah, so I think those were the article that I sort of quoted from at the beginning was one of the sort of crop of articles that came out that prompted, and I don't know if you remember this, it was very short-lived, the discourse about the internet novel. That was like early 2021 or like spring 2021,
Super
I
short
think.
lived. I barely remember.
Yeah, so because there was not much to say, I think is why it did not continue for very long. But it was just because these sort of two novels were published within a couple week, maybe like a month of each other, as I recall. And so people are like, "Wow, this is the new big trend," and And I thought that a lot of the reporting around the internet novel was sort of, it didn't go into why writing about the internet was interesting, at least to me. And I was sort of disappointed, not by the novels themselves, but by the discourse around it. Just being like, social media novel, what do we think? Kind of a thing, instead of really
Yeah.
getting deep into it, and about how the internet shapes the way you think and what that means for writing.
Right, right.
Yeah. So, but yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad. Let's see, I'm trying to think another famous internet novel in recent years. Ready Player One, I suppose.
Oh man.
That one, I guess, in terms of online gaming and the metaverse, which wasn't even called the metaverse back then, but virtual
Yeah.
reality and online gaming spaces. And I haven't read that book. I did unfortunately see the movie, and the impression I got, it's like, to me, it's a horror story that doesn't know that it's a horror story.
I also watched the movie without reading the book. I started to read the book and could not do the I couldn't do the writing style. It was the same actually with, and I'm sorry if this offends people out there. It was the same thing as like The Martian by Andy Weir.
Mm.
I could not do it. The voice that was used was, it wasn't my thing. So with the Ready Player One, it's just the constant sort of barrage of references. If I was being charitable, maybe I could say, perhaps he was doing it to make a point about, but I don't think he was. I
No,
think,
he wasn't. It was, "This is awesome, right? Isn't this
yeah,
great?" Like, no. Like, I feel like a slightly smarter, more self-aware author could have done this a little bit, with some tweaks and turned it into this generation's The Iron Dream or something. That would have been fucking brilliant. Like, if Paul
right.
Verhoeven had adapted it for screen instead of Steven Spielberg, it would have been brilliant,
Okay,
but that's
Paul
not what we
Verhoeven's Ready
got.
Player One would actually rule. I would
It would
watch
be
that.
it would be so good. It would horrify everybody. People would walk away from the theater traumatized. It would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that actually would have been awesome.
Yeah, but, uh, I feel like that one again, it's the unwillingness to look at your own ugliness that doesn't
Hmm.
work. Like, our guy, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He's good. There's an unwillingness to confront, like, I really shouldn't be spending my life this way.
Right.
This isn't good for me.
Yeah. And just the, I don't know. It works in a way if you, I guess, kind of remove the sort of death of the author it a little bit. It works in a way, just like you said, as kind of a horror thing. Just this character who has devoted his entire life to memorizing trivia in hopes of,
Specifically memorizing trivia about the '80s because this one rich guy loved the '80s a lot.
right,
Like, this
like you
this
said.
ossified culture based on the whims of a fucking plutocrat's corpse. That's fascinating. That's a
It
fucking
is, yeah.
amazing premise for some sort of dark satire.
Right, exactly. No, it completely is. You're right, but unfortunately, I think the execution, not so much.
I know, if there'd been a heavy dose of irony or something, this could have been a fucking brilliantly dark satirical novel, and it
Hmm.
was not.
Right.
It was not. It
Well,
wasn't.
maybe someone will someday do something.
I guess so. Oh
We
god.
can only hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember just seeing what being in the movie theater and just sort of watching it, and I'm like, why is Tracer Overwatch on the screen?
Yeah.
I I was dead sober watching that movie, and I was like, I don't know if being like intoxicated will help or hurt in this situation.
I remember seeing the Iron Giant on the screen and getting so upset because the
Yeah.
whole point of the Iron Giant is that it's this beautiful story about pacifism and
Right.
free will, and it's like, I turned it into a mindless weapon of violence. Like,
Yeah, but
motherfucker.
had you considered that it's an epic robot who
You
could
son
like
of a you
s-
fucking bastard, I'm so mad. How dare you? He did not die for this.
Yeah.
He did not stop the Cold War for this.
Oh god. I haven't seen the Iron Giant since I was a kid. I remember liking
It's a
it.
very good movie.
Yeah,
It's
I need to
really, really
revisit
good.
that.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
definitely. Now I imagine it's something like putting Princess Mononoke in there. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Upsetting.
Maybe they did. Maybe I blocked it out.
I
Maybe she
don't
was part
know.
of the charging army
I don't
at the
know.
end or whatever that was.
God, whatever the fuck that was.
The gamer army.
But like that, I shouldn't talk about that anymore, or else I'll just keep getting more upset. Fiction that uses the internet as a format
Mhm.
effectively. Fiction that uses the internet as a platform, because so many like web-based publications kind of struggle to stay afloat or to make
Oh,
money.
I just thought of an example of a
Oh,
one that I quite like. Maybe and maybe people will think I'm corny for liking this, but there's it it's not necessarily like a creepypasta, but it's called Mother Horse Eyes or Nine Mother Nine Horse Nine Eyes, depending on how you want to
that
pronounce
sounds
that out loud.
familiar.
Yeah, it's this piece of fiction which has since been sort of compiled into one place if you ever want to just read through it, which I recommend because initially it was this guy who was posting uh, in Reddit threads. It initially started out with one of the early examples is some, like are interesting being like this is American army guys doing drills on LSD, and it was someone responding to that in a way that like actually sort of did at in the first sentence address the topic, and then it segued into this story about this thing called like flesh interfaces, I think is the term that he used, and it is
Ooh,
this sort of sci-fi narrative about people who they find sort of different parts of people in different places, or they find people vivisected. And so there's reports of during World War II, there's this guy who was like totally vivisected in this mountain in Japan, blah, blah, blah. And it's this guy he keeps posting these things in completely unrelated threads on Reddit.
like a
And it,
true weirdo.
like a true weirdo. And at first you thought, oh, this is a true weirdo, but people who sort of looked at his post and actually looked at his user profile and looked at everything he was posting saw that it was actually a story that was being formed in these posts in these completely separate threads on completely separate subreddits. And so it sort of gets strung together into this very it jumps around in time. There's this section that's possibly like prehistoric. There's this section that's sections that take place during World War II, sections that take place in the future or near future, and it is this sort of fascinating Cronenberg slash. It's not quite Philip K. Dick, but sort of Cronenberg sci-fi meets. Honestly, parts of it do remind me of Infinite Jest. So like it is about actually it is about the internet in some way. That is not only is it internet based fiction, parts of it are about the internet in a way that I think is good, is done well, and it is about sort of this VR internet sort of future version of it. And
Mm.
people who use it so much that their physical bodies kind of deteriorate, and so it's a lot of body horror. I like it a lot. Yeah, so it's really fascinating. But the original format again was this guy just posting on different threads in Reddit, and this sort of these fans of his posts compiling it for him, which I
That
think is
rules.
it does, yeah. I'm very grateful that they did that because I would not hop around between all those threads. I would not do that. I'm too lazy.
No
But
way.
yeah, I can send you the link to that. It's pretty cool.
I love it. I love it when people do that. It's almost like a form of performance art, and it can be so
Exactly.
interesting. It's tricky though, because like the fact is that a thing like that is extremely hard to take credit for and monetize and things
Hmm.
like that. And like it or not, monetization is an incentive to do more of this thing, and authorship and getting credit for something is an incentive to do that. And
Hmm.
on these formats, on web-based formats and that type of storytelling, it's super hard to do that. Like
Oh yeah,
if the
100%.
Ted the Caver page said at the end, "Well, I hope you liked this story. This is by my name, so and so. Here's my Patreon." It
Yeah,
really would take away. It would just
it
take the
totally
wind
would.
out of your sails while you're reading it.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
And I can't blame any writer for trying to monetize their work. I mean, we have a Patreon for this podcast. We sell
Right.
merch. We're not like,
You got to eat.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Especially like these days. But it's
Mhm.
just a kind of a bummer because doing this stuff really effectively is very, very hard
Right.
to make money off of or get credit for or get authorship off of. And that I think
Right, because
is
you have
a
to stay
major
in character.
right. And it's such a
Yeah.
discouraging factor, which understandably.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. No, I fully do respect people who do stuff like that. I sort of grew up loving any stuff like that, ARGs, stuff like Mother Horse Eyes.
Oh
I
yeah.
always loved it so much. So, but
Right,
yeah.
or what's that weird Ben Drowned, that series of videos of, like,
Yeah.
I got a haunted Majora's Mask
Yeah.
cartridge, it's doing weird shit,
You
just
met with a
posted with no
terrible fate.
explanation, and it's
Yeah.
so weird and unsettling.
Yeah. Oh man, I loved that as like a teenager.
It's
I was so into
great.
that. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. And so the sort of the authorship of that sort of thing, again, definitely recommend We're All Going to the World's Fair, because it's one of the only pieces of media I've seen about people who make it, whereas something like Mother Horse Eyes is it, and We're All Going to the World's Fair is about the people who make it, the online art.
Right. Yeah, thinking about it now, just popping, off my head, an issue too, I think, with internet fiction or fiction versus internet communication, it's not just how we write, but how we read.
Mhm.
Like when we're reading on the internet, it's in these short bursts and we're distracted. We got a bunch of tabs open all at once. We're listening to music, we're checking email, blah blah blah. A book is just here's the book.
Right.
The book is in front of you. Read the fucking book. It's just a
Yeah.
wildly different experience. So not only do I find that writing online versus reading a book versus the way you read online is different. I tend to find that online magazines often tend to publish with the stories that get big online are I sound like a snob, but often not quite as deep to me as
Mhm.
stories as novels or stories that get big on paper, just because the stories that really work well online are ones that are not really meant to be read carefully and slowly contemplated and looked over
Right.
with depth and
Yeah,
it
think
to
about like
succeed.
cat
Right.
person kind of a thing.
Yeah. Like, I thought
Yeah.
Cat Person was good.
Mhm.
The ending felt a little cheap, to be honest. Like,
Right.
it took this guy who's like, this very realistic portrayal of a guy who kinda sucks, and then it's like, "Well, we gotta make him a straight up villain now." Ah, it just felt a little cheap.
It felt like we were talking about sort of putting people, or I guess characters in this case, into certain boxes, just very sort of snap judgment things about them based on online like archetypes of people. And
Right.
that's what the ending of that story felt like to me.
Yeah,
It was
like,
like
"Oh,
very like
surprise,
shitty
he's a
guy.
Redditor."
Yeah, shitty guy, whatever thing. Yeah, I thought the reaction to Cat Person was also really fascinating, because I felt like a lot of people missed the point that was like very much in the text. A lot of people being like, the protagonist did nothing wrong or whatever, and it's like, I don't think the author would say that. Like,
Right.
I don't think so. Did you skim this or something? Like,
Yeah.
maybe it's
Well,
because they
that's the thing,
relate
it's
to
a
her.
lot of it is fiction that is meant to be skimmed.
Yeah.
And the fiction that does well, at least online, tends to be stuff either that's super short or
Mhm.
work that is best experienced skimming and work that kind of requires a certain amount of depth
Mhm.
and care and time tends not to do as well, unfortunately.
Right.
And
Yeah,
maybe
that makes
that's just me
sense.
being a snob, but the reality is if I'm reading a book, I'm just looking at the book. I don't have multiple tabs open.
Yeah. And I think, like, speaking of the internet and fiction, obviously, I think the social media addiction, at least for me, but I think for a lot of people our age and younger, it's sort of destroyed your ability to read as much as you used to. It has for me anyway. It shortened my attention span a lot, and so I've tried to sort of consciously get back into focusing on reading and getting better at just sort of sitting there and finishing a whole book or whatever.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's part of
yeah,
why I do the monthly bonus episode book clubs. It's like, "Raquel,
yeah,
you have to read things that
yeah,
aren't online. Read it you have to read a book. Here's your fucking homework assignment."
right. And you see like a lot of posts from people who are like, what happened to me when I was in the 8th grade? I could read 5 books a day, but now I'm an adult, I'm a former gifted child, and I'm an adult now, and I can't read anything except Twitter. And it's like, I think Twitter's part of your problem there,
Yeah.
genuinely. I'm
Reading
sure,
and
like,
writing too. I've
right.
seen you see a lot of people. I can be guilty of this to a certain extent, but people who talk about, "Oh, I hate writing. I'm never going to finish this book. I want to be a writer, but I can't. It's so hard to write." It's like, well,
Mhm.
you. It's so hard to find the time to write. It's like, well, you just spent like 3 hours on Twitter.
Right,
That
exactly.
could have been book time.
Oh, 100%. And I want to be clear, but like for both reading and in my case drawing comics, I'm super guilty of this too. So
Oh
like
yeah,
I want to say this like with total empathy or sympathy rather for people out there. Like yeah, I get it. Me too. But
I
uh
I do some of my most productive fiction writing at work during downtime at the office because we have a
yeah.
firewall that blocks social media.
Ah, that's so lucky.
I will when there is downtime, I will just work on a manuscript or something, and I usually get a fair bit of productive time because genuinely, unless work interrupts me when I gotta do work, it's like, yeah, I can focus on this because I cannot
Mhm.
go on Twitter. I cannot go on social media at all.
Yeah. No, definitely. So yeah, so it's fascinating fiction that sort of like Duck's New Report that shows the way that your mind has been sort of Swiss cheesed by the internet, and your attention span is reduced, and your thoughts are jumping around all the time. It's interesting the sort of fun irony of that being a 1,000-page book that you need to
Yeah.
sit down and read.
Yeah, no kidding.
Mhm. But
But it sounds good. I've heard extremely good things about that book from multiple people now.
I liked it a lot. It is a pretty polarizing book, as any sort of 1,000-page doorstop
Yeah,
tends
no
to be,
kidding.
but I liked it a lot. I thought it was really interesting and unique and like perceptive about a lot of stuff about the way we live now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, that's cool. Maybe I'll check it out, but 1,000 fucking pages. I don't
It
know if
is
I can I don't know if I have 1,000 pages worth of focus in me right now.
exactly no. I do not blame you. It's a commitment,
I
but
was trying to read Blood Meridian for a book club and my eyes kept sliding off of it. I couldn't. I'm not in the right headspace. You know what? I'm going to read Junji Ito for a book club. That's what we're doing. I need a book with pictures in it this month. I'm sorry.
no, both great choices. Blood Meridian sort of suffers from the Faulkner thing. I love Blood Meridian, I love Faulkner, but it is prose that you need to focus on.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
right now my brain's just like, "Nah, it's not. Nope.
exactly. You
Nope."
need to be in a very particular mood.
Yeah. And it's just not there. So I am looking at pictures of spirals instead. It's pretty good.
I love Uzumaki. It's a great
It's
choice.
it's very good.
Can't go wrong.
So anyway, we've been talking for about an hour. Was there anything else you wanted to add? Any internety fictiony thing?
Honestly, I feel like we covered a lot of it.
Good.
I can't think of anything right now other than it's been really cool to talk about this with someone because I think it's like a really interesting phenomenon that obviously we will see more of in the future. Inevitably, we'll see more of it in the future, and we'll see how it changes and
Yeah.
how people's reaction to it changes as well.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing like how it's done well or seeing people succeed in it because that could be pretty interesting. I feel
Yeah.
like Sayaka Murata could do an amazing job with it.
Oh yeah.
She is weird enough and breezy enough to really make it work.
I feel like Convenience Store Woman touched on the incel culture with that one character, the guy, a little
Yes.
bit.
That
So
or it's the story of a Volcel versus an incel, and it
exactly.
rocks. It's so good.
It is so good. Yeah, no, I love that book.
Yeah,
So it's awesome.
I'm completely obsessed.
Hmm.
I fucking oh my god, it's One of the most extraordinary books I've ever read.
Yeah. I want to read her new one. I haven't read it yet, but I hear good
Earthlings?
things. Yeah.
It's very good. It goes
Awesome.
full sicko mode. And she's got a collection of short stories, I think, coming out this summer, and I am psyched. The instant it comes out, I am getting that book.
Awesome.
I will
Yeah,
be
I
like
will
a weird
definitely
Star
check
Wars
it out.
fan camping outside the bookstore to get it on opening day or something.
Exactly.
Like, Raquel, you can just pre-order this and have it shipped to you. No.
No, I feel like we gotta support the weirdos out there.
I need to line up. I need to sleep in a tent for several days. I need to wear a konbori uniform to
The
show my
Barnes and Noble
devotion.
doesn't know what to do. They're
What?
like what is this illegal? Like
Who is this? Why are you lining up? There's no one else doing this. You don't need to do this.
exactly.
I wanted to be first in line. There's no line. You're the only one doing this.
There's no line yet. You wait
Yeah,
for all the other real fiction heads to come out,
that's
line
right.
up.
The other Murata heads.
Yeah. Got to think of like the like stand name for
Oh yeah,
Murata.
Sayaka Murata fan cams.
Now I got to make one.
Anyway, so why don't we wrap it up? Where can
Mhm.
our listeners find and support your work?
Yeah, so I'm on pretty much every social media at RE Parish, PARRISH comics. My website is reparishcomics.com. And I have a novella, graphic novella out, kind of, if you can call it that. It's called Bra Amadeus, and it's a parody of Amadeus by Peter
Right.
Schaefer, but featuring frat boys. So you can buy that from me online if
I've
you
seen
want.
yeah, I've seen some of those comics. They're very good.
Thank
They're
you.
extremely funny.
Thank you so much.
It's a very, very, very specific parody, which I appreciate and respect.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I took my experience with American Greek life culture and I had to put it somewhere. So that's my love hate letter to Greek life in
Yeah,
college.
the combination of high culture and low culture, and the fact that you chose Amadeus. Anyone could have parodied Star Wars or whatever. Anyone recognized, like, no, I will compare the trials and tribulations of this frat boy to the maddening jealousy of the tortured Salieri.
Exactly. That's exactly what being in a frat is like. It's exactly like Amadeus.
I am the patron saint of mediocrity.
Exactly.
Oh god. Well, that's great. Definitely check that out. And you've probably seen these comics around if you're listening to this podcast. You've probably seen our guests' comics. They're very good.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and for suggesting this topic. It was a really, really good idea.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. I've been a very long time listener of the podcast, so I was super excited to have you have me on.
Yeah, I'll admit when I realized that, like, because I think it was the comic where the founders are deciding that they're going to put a very weird pyramid on the dollar. I think that I remember coming across that comic on Tumblr like 10 years
Yeah.
ago and going like, "Yes, this is perfect." So it's really neat to have you
Thank you
on.
so much.
And thank you all for listening. That's all for this episode. If you like what you heard, head to patreon.com/writegood and subscribe. Until next time, keep writing good.
This has been Rite Good with Raquel S. Benedict. Hosted by Raquel S. Benedict and produced by Matt Keeley for KS Media LLC. Theme song by Surgeryhead. This has been a Kitty Sneezes production. For comments and concerns, please write to us at writegud@kittysneezes.com. That is RITEGUD at kittysneezes.com. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/writegood.
kittysneezes.com in color.